Perhaps. Um, Down syndrome by itself is not a risk factor, but the risk factors associated with Down syndrome can sometimes make you a risk factor.
Uh-huh.
So that's up to the doctor, and we'll see. We'll see.
Good.
Did anyone else in your family test positive?
No, so far
Okay.
so good. And Florida is really the hot spot. So we're being very, very careful. We were very careful with him, but you get a breakthrough case, you begin to believe that you're going to be okay. And then I'm hearing a lot of breakthrough cases, but at least everything I've heard, they've all been mild cases because of the vaccine.
Well,
Well, first
here,
and foremost, that's what we wanted to hear, Rick. That's
Yeah,
good news.
absolutely.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Rare Book Cafe, the book lovers' rendezvous, where the topics are priceless and the conversation is free. I'm your host. My name is Ed Markowitz of Montgomery Rare Books in Portland, Oregon. I've got Lee Lynn up there in the top left. Hello, Lee, from
good
the Ridge
morning.
Books in Calhoun, Georgia. And
Good
one of our
morning.
favorite, here we go again. One of our favorite guests, Rick Wilbur from Central Florida. With a bit of practice, we'll get it right. Well, everybody, we're here every Saturday at 12:30 Eastern Time and 5:30 Greenwich Mean Time. We're streaming to you live on Facebook and on YouTube. And then during the week, you can find the audio version of this. We'll call it the podcast rather than the video cast, wherever your favorite podcast can be found. We're a virtual cafe accessible anywhere in the world, and everyone is welcome. And we want to hear your ideas. Rarebookcafe@gmail.com. Tell us what you like about the show. Tell us who your favorite guests are. Tell us which host you would like voted off the island. Only kidding. Maybe not. I don't know. Anyway, rarebookcafe@gmail.com. Send us an email. Let us know what you want more of. Later in the show, we're going to have our road warrior, Richard Morey's got some great news. He's finally found that book he was looking for after weeks and weeks. Our favorite ephemerist, Barbara Lowe, is back after an eventful virtual ephemera fair this last weekend, in which both Lee and I participated in, and we'll hear from one of our favorite weekly segments, Things Found in Books, from David Hess. All right, but now for a little bit of chit chat with my co-host and Rick Wilbur. Rick, welcome back.
Glad to be here. Always glad to be here.
You are a busy man, award-winning science fiction writer, a visiting professor at Western Colorado University, a short story writer, and a big baseball fan.
Certainly a big baseball fan. And
Big baseball fan.
and in baseball, I grew up in baseball, and it sort of connects to my writing all the time. So,
And your dad was a professional league baseball player?
my dad played for 8 years in the major leagues back in the late 40s through mid 50s. He was a journeyman. He was a backup catcher. Got traded every couple of years. Went down to the minors for a year one time, and went to play winter ball in Havana, Cuba one time. So it was for the family. It was a fascinating way to grow up. It was almost kind of military. We followed him around where he was getting traded, and there he is. There's his Boston Red Sox card, and that's my a lot of he has a lot of baseball cards. I have a lot of cool pictures of him, but that's maybe my favorite. That picture you can see, because first of all, he's got that 1,000-yard stare catchers have, looking off into the distance. And secondly, when he was playing for the Red Sox, he was backup catcher, and then for one season, 1954, he was their number one pinch hitter, and when the situation was right, and he did really well. He had more than 100 at bats as a pinch hitter, and he had more RBIs than hits, which means that you're coming up with men on base and
Yeah.
you're knocking them in, right?
There's some pressure out there.
Multiple times. Yeah. And I think, to the best of my knowledge, I think there's only about 10 players in the history of the game that can make that claim, that were
Very
that
cool.
effective as pinch hitters. So
Very cool. Well, Rick, we're about halfway through the baseball season because we a little bit more than halfway. That in the East, the Tampa Bay Rays are sitting atop of the league with the Yankees several places behind, regrettably. I know our executive producer, T. Allen Smith, is excited of his hometown there team. But regardless who gets into the World Series this year, Rick, the baseball game of the year, which also has a lot to do with books and literature, has to be the game played in Iowa last week.
that was culturally, and in terms of sort of the literary and filmic connections to baseball, that was just an amazing occurrence. That, first of all, that it really paid homage to W.P. Kinsella, maybe the greatest baseball fiction writer of them all, almost without question. And then secondly, it talks about the power of film. This was just a set, for a movie that they happened to go to Iowa so they could do a really effective set. And
But it's a permanent set. It's going to be there every year from now on.
that's how it turned out to be, because it was had so much impact. And I watched the game, and then I watched all these highlights, and even though I know it's all sort of make believe, I was deeply moved. I was really affected by the scenes you're seeing now of that ballpark, and the players walking in through the Iowa corn. I grew up in the Midwest in Missouri and Illinois, and very familiar with tall fields of corn. And
Look at that.
And when they walked through that corn and onto the field, I had tears in my eyes. I was deeply moved. The original Shoeless Joe is a fabulous book, and the movie is rather easily my favorite baseball movie, and in the top 5 or 6 of my all-time favorite movies, because it's in my particular case, because it's about the triad of fathers and sons in baseball. And I lived in that kind of triad. I grew up that way, with a father who was a big leaguer, not a star. Just there's WP.
And the
But
way the game ended with a walk-off homer, I mean,
yeah,
W.P. Kinsella couldn't have written it himself.
yeah, just fabulous stuff.
But
So I thought that was a great experience, and I've been involved in all sorts of conversations with other people after that, and I saw one comment that they ought to make that the site of the All-Star game every year. And
so it's only an 8,000 seat stadium, though.
yeah, but the All-Star game is mainly a national. It would steal the economic impact of the All-Star game from some city every year. But it would be a perfect place. Although you have to wonder, if you do it too much, do you lose the magic?
Now, Rick, W.P. Kinsella was a Canadian. Many people don't know that. He grew up on the western plains of Canada, and
Right.
Alberta, and in
Right.
Edmonton. How did he pick up baseball?
Good question. I know that he also wrote a lot about the indigenous peoples, the First Nations in Canada. And in Canada, he is at least as famous for those stories as he is for his baseball stories. But those stories sort of didn't filter across the border. And here he's known as sort of the ultimate, baseball fantasy writer.
Yeah.
And by golly, he's good at it. And he has a very complete understanding of the emotional values of the game, which for me is the reason to read those. When I first read the Iowa Baseball Confederacy, I think was the first of his books that I read when I was a
Which was
younger
the second book he
writer.
wrote, I think.
Yeah, and there have been 2 books in my life that have shocked me and encouraged me, and that's one of them. And the other one is a science fiction novel called A Canticle for Leibowitz,
Oh,
written by Walter Miller, and
yeah.
and in both cases, those novels got great mainstream literary respect, and I thought they were, um, especially Shoeless Joe later from Kinsella. I thought that was just an really good mainstream literature that, oh, by the way, is also from the fantastic. Um, and it got such great respect. I thought what I was trying to do is write some things like that, and it sort of validated my desire to someday write half as well as Kinsella.
Before we move on to science fiction, Rick, I got one more question for you. Kinsella also went to the eminent School of Writing at the University of Iowa, and you yourself are also a professor of writing, University of Western Colorado. Is that right?
Western Colorado University, right?
Yeah. Um, Tell us about these programs. Whether it's Iowa or Western Colorado or your local community college. What kind of encouragement can you give to those out there who are trying to become writers themselves?
Well, there are a number of MFA programs, Master of Fine Arts programs around the country, and some of them you go there and do an intensive couple of years on campus and get your MFA, and then go on to be a writer and frequently a professor. The MFA is often considered the only degree you need to teach at the college level if it's in creative writing. But there are also a number of programs that are low residency programs, and where I teach at Western Colorado is one of those where you do it. You get your you study writing, creative writing online for much of the year, and then in the summer at Western you get together with everybody involved in the program for a 2-week intensive in Gunnison, Colorado, at 7,800 feet and in altitude. And if you're like me, I live at sea level, so that's always a shock to my system to go to that intensive. And then you get to know everybody there, and you build your relationships there, and you study hard there, a really intense 2 weeks, and you do that 3 times, and you have your Master of Fine Arts. And my program, it's a genre fiction program, so we embrace science fiction and fantasy and mysteries and spy novels and westerns and romance and all of those genres. And the program is a very popular one. So that's pretty much how those programs work. And in the best case, you wind up acquiring the skills that will help you get published. But even in the worst case, you have a master's and you now have a legitimate credential to help you get a job teaching, perhaps somewhere.
Yeah.
So
Great.
I
Well,
think they're
thank you
very
for
much
sharing that.
worthwhile.
The people who tune into this show are readers and book lovers and sometimes closeted writers, and
Right.
sometimes out of the closet writers. But for those of you that are still in the closet, we wanted to hear what words you had about that. Now we can move on to science
Can I
fiction.
ask a question about that?
Surely.
Go ahead.
Please.
What do you have any statistics on, like, what percentage of graduates of the program actually go on to be published writers?
Our program's only about 10 years old, so we're still sort of
hard
building.
to tell.
And but I won't name names, but I know a couple of people from the last 3-4 people now. It's a little hard to tell because of the boom in self-publishing.
Right.
So if you restrict yourself to traditional publishing, I can think of 5 or 6 we've had in the last 4 years who have gotten a book published. We also have a poetry major. One of them, her first poetry collection just came out to rave reviews.
Super.
And
Well, that's good.
but as people involved in the publishing business and in books and in writing, that it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. So going through a program might result in selling that second or third novel 5 years down the road,
Mm-hmm.
rather than the novel that you write for your master's thesis.
Right.
But on the other hand, one of our students from 3 years ago, she sold that master's thesis to a major publisher. God bless
Good
her.
for her.
Yeah. So it does
Speaking of
happen.
published writers, congratulations on your second book, Alien Day, in the series. And I'm assuming that means that there will be a series. All right, I'm going to ambush you with this question, Rick.
Okay.
I read a review from Alan Smale, also a Sideways Award-winning author. He called your book a truly original take on First Contact. Start off your answer to this question with a yes or a no. Have we already had First Contact?
That's mean. And I can't answer maybe. No, I have to answer. I have to answer yes or no.
Yes or no? All right, you
No,
can.
I would say no.
You think if we
Really?
had, we would have heard about it?
Surprises me.
I think if we had, yes, we would have heard about it. But I also think that there are all sorts of possibilities beyond just simply saying, because of the recent revelations from the Navy and from the Pentagon, and because of those revelations, they have some they can't yet explain, and those Navy pilots pretty much know what they're doing when they're chasing one of those things around. So I think it was Navy pilots, and don't want to malign the Air Force. Maybe it was Air Force pilots.
All right, well, I'm going on the record saying that I'm a yes man.
Okay.
But I believe that the contact that we have had is with beings that are far superiorly, emotionally above us, that they don't get involved.
That's entirely possible, perhaps even probable. My feelings of this have changed a lot in the last few years because of sort of the embrace by more official sources of the possibility of it being so. I think, I suspect that if they have sent craft here, they're probably not sending themselves here, but just sending their craft, just like we send craft to Mars.
Hmm.
And that would explain some of the rather impossible speeds and turns and G forces that we see, because there's nobody in there, nothing in there. It's just a very high level of technology. So yeah, is that possible? Absolutely, that's
Well,
possible.
I hope we can be considered that type of race someday. But anyways, what makes good science fiction? Is it the unknown that makes good science fiction, or what makes the good plot of science fiction?
Well, science fiction is sort of all over the place. It's character based, the really good stuff, but science fiction
Hmm.
is offering you a lot of what if questions. So, um, what if we had the technology to go to Mars and we went there? What would happen? And what if we had the technology to go 2 galaxies away? What would happen? And it's fun. Science fiction is often a very fun read, but science fiction is also often very political, often very, very much interested in society. Um, I get accused all the time of being a writer. I'm always writing about relationships. Yeah. So,
Hmm.
it sounds like I'm a romance writer writing science fiction, and that's all right. I'll embrace that. Yeah, I do write about relationships a lot. Sometimes relationships between humans and aliens, but relationships. Um, so I think science fiction's appeal lies in its expansive sense of wonder. It's anything's possible, and all you have to do is give us enough to make it plausible for us for this novel, and you're off and running. There you go.
Good.
And it also gives you an opportunity to imagine how the characters in the science fiction react to these strange situations, and what would you do if you were in a similar situation. So I think it makes you think, about what would you do if suddenly an alien appeared on your porch? This kind of thing.
Yeah, that's good, Lee. I
Yeah.
mean, science fiction writers would be proud to be among the number that of people who write stories that the reader connects with in that fashion and wonder.
And I think A Canticle for Leibowitz is wonderful. It's that and Hero's Journey have been my two favorite science
That's
fiction.
great.
Though
That's
yours are getting right up there. I have really loved Alien Morning and Alien Day.
Well, thank you.
And but those two, which I think a lot of people have never heard of.
Yeah.
I don't think it's not like the Foundation series and stuff like that, but I think those two are just wonderful. Just wonderful.
A Canticle for Leibowitz, which was published, I want to say 1960 maybe, and was by Walter M. Miller, and it's post-apocalyptic and a nice analog for the monks of Ireland in the Middle Ages preserving knowledge. It's happening in the post-apocalyptic times here, and a religious order is preserving knowledge. And it's really brilliant writing. And it too, like Kinsella's work, it got great mainstream reviews. And when I was just starting to write science fiction and read it heavily in high school, by golly, here's a book that everybody likes. So, not all science fiction is rockets, and saving the universe. Some science fiction is this really thoughtful exploration of life struggle and the preservation of sanity and civilization. It was just brilliant stuff. And much later in life, in the mid-1990s, I got to interview Walter Miller when I was working for a newspaper in Tampa, the Tampa Tribune. Which is now long gone, unfortunately. And he lived in Daytona Beach. I went over and interviewed him about his long-awaited next novel, the sequel to Canticle, that he'd been working on for 30 years. And that was a wonderful conversation. I felt like I was sitting next to one of the gods. I had so admired his work, and here I was in his little house in Daytona Beach, and he and his wife, and they were bringing me cups of coffee, and it was really, really something. So,
well, I'm not embarrassed to admit it that I have not read the book because I have much more embarrassing things in my life. But I am gonna, when we're done, get online with my Multnomah County Library and order a copy and go pick it up this week. Got a few more questions for you, Rick, but before we get there, let me just remind everybody that you're welcome to the Rare Book Cafe, the Book Lovers Rendezvous. We've got with us author, historian, professor, and baseball lover extraordinaire, Rick Wilbur. Coming up right after this, we've got David Hess of The Bookman with his weekly series, Things Found in Books. Barbara Lowe will be joining us with an update on the Ephemera Society of America. And then we've got Richard Morey, who's finally found that book which has been so elusive. Rick, you're a book reader, a book writer. Are you a book collector?
I am. I collect Zane Grey novels. Who knows how he gets started doing that? But Zane Grey not only wrote Westerns, he wrote baseball novels and baseball short story collections. And I have somewhere around here, I have 3 or 4 copies of The Red-Headed Outfield. And I got started with Zane Grey through some Westerns, and then realized he was writing about baseball. This is 1900, early 1900. And that was yet another indication to me of the deep history of literature and baseball. That people have been writing about it for a long time. So if I collect anything, it's Zane Grey, and I like to go into a bookstore, an antiquarian bookstore, and go to the stacks and look for Zane Grey.
I imagine you've got a couple of autographs.
I don't, but I bought an autographed copy of, let me think of which one, Thunder Mountain, a Zane Grey classic, for a friend of mine who was retiring, and I knew I knew he was a guy, I knew he liked westerns, so I just assumed he had to like Zane Grey, and when I gave him that at the retirement dinner, um, I'd like to think he teared up a little bit. He was really deeply moved to have a Zane Grey autographed copy of Thunder Mountain, which
Now
led
we
me
know
to
it.
read Thunder Mountain, of course, and it was terrific.
And now anybody who knows you knows what they can get you for a Christmas present.
Yeah, that's what you can get me for Christmas. Give me a signed Zane Grey.
So, Rick, you and your fellow science fiction writers are looking into the future. Can you make a living doing that other than writing it?
So, there's a wide range of
Other than, of course,
success.
fortune telling and reading palms.
Right. There's a wide range. I mean, I have a really good friend of mine is Kevin J. Anderson. He's an extraordinarily well published novelist. He's involved in the new Dune movie. He's involved in that. He's been writing Dune novels with a colleague for a long time, and then he writes all sorts of fantasy and science fiction, and he makes a very good living. He's a great guy, and he is like, and I have a lot of friends who make a living at it. Do I make a living at it? No, but with teaching, you could make a living at it, and I'm writing these stories. I mean, most of my work is short stories published in magazines, and if I get a check for $2,000, I did really well on that story. So if I wanted to make a living, could I sell 50 of those stories a year? I doubt it. I think I've sold about 60 total in my career. So for most people, it's something that they love doing, and they love having some success at it, and sure, they would love to make a living at it, but they're not stopping just because they're not making a living at it. They're doing other things. They're teaching. They're booksellers. They're whatever they are, while they're doing the thing they love, which is telling stories.
How about from the consulting side? I remember when I was in the corporate world, I was with a couple of big Fortune 500 companies, and on staff we had the corporate economic officer, and it was his job to look at the changing economics and deciding whether we should be investing in new billion-dollar fabs. Are people, our companies, our organizations deferring to science fiction writers to figure out new products, to figure out where the market is heading?
Yeah, that happens all the time. I think. I don't know if they're doing it in economics, but they're certainly doing it in science. I have a lot of friends who have been involved with discussions, future discussions, with panels that are put on by NASA and at JPL, and because the scientists like to have the science fiction writers come in and just brainstorm on what could be. Because oftentimes, once you realize something could be, you find ways to make it happen.
Very good. Well, Lee, I know what's in your future later in the show. A little discussion on Joel Chandler Harris, perhaps?
Yeah, that kind of goes back a ways, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's quite a broad range of things to be talking about, from Joel Chandler Harris to science fiction.
That's quite a range.
Rick, I want to thank you for coming. I want to thank you for giving our guests their reading list for this weekend.
Check that out. A Canticle for Leibowitz and Anything by W.P. Kinsella.
And Kevin J. Anderson.
Kevin J. Anderson also.
Just when is
your very own Alien Morning and Alien Day.
When is your new story coming out in Asimov's?
There's a story in the current issue, just came out a couple of days ago, called Billy the Kid.
Okay, because I looked online and couldn't find it. So
it's not yet available. If you get Asimov's through Kindle, it has already shown up in your Kindle, and it will be there soon.
Okay.
Baseball science fiction, which is
Okay.
I write a lot of those, and it's close to my heart.
You sort of had a feeling at the end of the game last week that the players were going to simply disappear into the corn, and
Yeah, I was kind of hoping they would.
never come back.
I thought Kevin Costner did is this heaven, and the crowd came back with no, this is Iowa. That was a great moment.
Yeah.
Is Billy the Kid about a baseball player or about
Billy the Kid is about a 15-year-old girl shortstop who plays for the Hollywood Stars of the Pacific Coast League in the 1940s. Tremendous talent, and she gets involved in all sorts of stuff with Mo Berg, a character I've used a lot in a lot of stories, and his handler, who's a super spy, time traveling woman. It's crazy and zany and really good fun.
All right, the latest edition of Asimov's Science Fiction magazine.
The September-October issue of Asimov's Science Fiction magazine has my novella in it called Billy the Kid.
Okay. We'll look for it.
You've upgraded from short story to novella.
It's actually listed as a novelette, but it's a novella. It's 20,000 words. Darn it, it's a novella. Oh, there's another recent one. The Wandering Warriors I did with, speaking of scientists and science fiction, I wrote that with Alan Smale, who's an Oxford educated physicist who works for NASA Goddard. And when he's not doing science, he loves to write alternate history stories, and he and I collaborated on this story, The Wandering Warriors. Great fun. About a baseball team that winds up in ancient Rome.
Rick, next time you're on the show, we'd love to hear more about Mo Berg.
Great. I'll be happy to do that.
Boy, we could do a show on that.
You could do 2 shows on that. It's 10 shows on that. There's a good movie out on that, by the way. The Catcher Was a Spy.
Oh, yeah.
Good movie.
Excellent. Always entertaining, always informative. See you next time, Rick.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, Ed. Thanks, Lee.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Keep smiling. All right. I enjoyed that. I hope you did as well, Rick Wilbur. Now it's time for Things Found in Books from David Hess of the Bookman Bookstore in Orange, California. Every week, reliably, David shows up with an 8 to 12-minute segment. We'll call it a 10-minute talk on things that he has found in books. He's got a great open shop. I don't know, I'm guessing at least 70 or 80,000 volumes on the shelf. Just from I've seen pictures of his store online on Instagram. And how did he get those books in through the back door and cleans them up, opens up the front cover, and the things that he finds. And a couple of weeks ago, he found some baby footprints inside of a book. He showed them to us. Well, I think that story has a happy ending. Take it away, David.
Hello, this is David from the Bookman in Orange, welcoming you to our latest segment of Things Found in Books. And we have a few items for you today I would like to share. We'll start right in with this book called Plot Lines of 100 Famous Plays. And this came in the other day, and when I thumbed through it, I found this photo of this gentleman. I guess he's dressed as a friar or a monk or something. There's no date on it, but the photography and the color scheme, it seems to be from the 70s. And maybe he was playing a part in one of the plays in the book, and it was used as a bookmark. And he's looking very actorly up into the heavens while he holds his mug of mead. And so I thought that was interesting. I thought I'd share it here today. Moving along, I found in this giant book, Corvette, America's sports car. It's so heavy. We won't hold it much longer. Found a couple of things actually in this book. First was this hand-drawn birthday card. Now it's Popeye and Little Sweet Pea, and it says it's a it's a little something for you. It's a little something for you. And the thing about it is the artwork is actually quite well done, and it's original. It's drawn on there. It's not a print. Someone made this card for somebody, and on the inside, it's calligraphy. And again, they went through a lot of trouble on this card. It says, "If you wait till January, it's my promise you shall receive an issue of Life magazine for each month in the year 1980." So that was their present. They got a year's subscription to Life magazine, 1980, when magazines were a thing. And I thought that was really cool. I really enjoyed that one. And also in the book, there's a little 45 record, the South Prairie Band. And the two songs on it are "The Ways of a Dedicated Drinking Man" and "Mr. Kenny Rogers, Would You Write a Shorter Song?" And there's the band. It's 45. It's from 1983. The records from 1983. And they were a small, kind of unknown band out of Tacoma, Washington. And I don't think they ever quite hit the big time, but they did make one 45, and I have it. There you go. Finally, from my archives of things I found in books, I don't have the book. This is just something I found in a book and set in a drawer, but it's called Our Wedding Day. And it's a little booklet with a little string holding it together. And inside it says "Our Wedding Day." And it has some poetry and pretty little pictures. And another page of poetry and pretty little pictures. And one more poem, just to make sure that you have plenty to read. But in the back here, it says, "This certifies that on the 24th day of June in the year of our Lord 1924, Warren R. Nicholson and Helen H. Windsor were by me united in holy matrimony. In Elston, Maryland. I think it's Elston, Maryland. I could be wrong on that one. According to the ordinance of God and the laws of Maryland." And it's signed by the witnesses at the bottom from 1924. Then on the back, there's places for the guests to sign. There's no signatures there. And bridal gifts, there's no signatures there. And at the end, another little poem. In case you didn't get enough poetry to read, you get a little epilogue at the end. Which reminds me that finding that personal certificate. A few episodes ago, I shared with you a footprint certificate, like birth certificate, with the little footprints up top. And we'll show you a picture of it here just to remind you what it was, kind of a birth certificate. And I got an email at oldbook.com from a woman who said, "I heard from another woman who went to ancestry.com and she found me and contacted me and said that you made a video with my aunts, my first cousins, I guess, my first cousin's birth certificate." And I thought, and she was interested in it. And we had a nice little dialogue, and I was able to pack it up and send it to her in San Dimas, California. And so my little thing I found in a used book years later in the Bookman in Orange, California, found its way back to the family. I'm glad to hear it. I was glad to do it. And Rebecca is the one who did the legwork on that. And so, Rebecca, if you're watching, I want to thank you for doing that. That was very kind. And we got it back to her. So thank you for watching. And thank you for watching. And if you would like to share anything with me that you found in a book, or a question, or anything, or you see something that I've shared that maybe you'd like to have, just let me know. Most of the stuff, like I said, it's in a drawer, in a box. And I just don't have the heart to throw this stuff away. So if you find anything in a book that you'd like me to know or share, please contact me at oldbook@ebookman.com. That's oldbook@ebookman.com. And thanks for stopping by, and I look forward to doing this again next week. This is David from the Bookman in Orange. Thank you. Bye.
I love it when a story has a happy ending. I didn't see that one coming, though. Thank you, David. And now it's time to bring in Barbara Lowe. She was on the show a couple of weeks ago talking about the upcoming ephemera. Well, actually, she came on the show talking about our school days, and she was bringing us reports and things from the late 1800s, student certifications. I always love the things she brought on, and she told us about the ephemera show that was about to happen last weekend, and happen it did. Barbara?
Hi.
There she is.
Hi.
Good to see you guys again.
And you as well. I say the same thing every morning when I get up and shave in the mirror and say, oh, it's good to see you again.
That's always a good sentiment.
Always a good sentiment. How'd the show go, Barbara?
It was really good. Well, let's start with the conference. We had two presenters. One was Paul Erickson from the University of Michigan, and he talked about the Clements Library and their collection of ephemera. And first he talked about his personal collection and collecting interests, and then he talked about their collection and what they look for. And I personally, as a dealer, found it extremely helpful because he talked about the things that as an institutional buyer, he looks for when he's making a purchase. And so that's going to be up on our website relatively soon. And I would advise any dealers that are interested in selling to institutions to check out his presentation, because I thought it was very informative in terms of the things that they look for there. And then after that, we had a presentation from Beth Carroll Horrocks, who is actually on our board of directors at the Ephemera Society. And she talked about her personal collection of rulers, of which she has about 18,000. And that was interesting in terms of how she decided to kind of corral her collection and put limits on it, because as many collectors know, there's creeping elegance. You extend to another category and another category and another category, and the next thing you know, you filled rooms in your house with your different collections. So she talked about how she defined the limits of what she was going to collect, and not only that, but how she catalogs them and keeps track of what she has. And so that was interesting. So following those two, then we had the fair. And we were really excited that for a mid-year fair, we had almost 100 dealers that participated. And it was a really good fair. I think that you guys will have to give me your input too, but I thought that the sales were pretty robust.
I was happy with it.
Mine have already been picked up this morning.
Is that what's going out?
Yep.
When I get done with this call, I have my stack in the other room that I'm taking to the post office.
But I had 36 items. I sold 10 items online, and probably another 4 or 5 items from tangential relationships from the fair.
That's excellent. How about you, Lee?
I had 36 also, and I sold 6 or 7 in the fair, and then may have a couple of other sales for some items that I sent out information on, who to people who had looked at things during the fair, and met a few new people, which was neat, and had some interesting conversations with one dealer in Boston who bought some things from me, and I was doing some research on one of the groups of letters that he bought, and we talked for about 2 hours at several different times over the weekend, and that was fun, and it's making contacts with people that you wouldn't otherwise know. I think has been a real value to these fairs. But it was a profitable weekend. I stayed home in pajamas part of the time, so you can't complain about that. Yeah, and another good thing about these virtual shows is your expenses are so much lower because you're not, the booth rentals are reasonable. You're not having travel expenses.
No hotel.
No hotel, no gas, no paying someone to feed the cat, this kind of thing. So,
yeah. What did you think of the items, Barbara?
I thought
my first impression, I just wanted to put out there, was quality, and I think the condition of everything I saw online was very, very good. What about the diversity? Are you seeing any new trends? Are you seeing new categories pop up in the buying? What did you see?
Yeah, that was interesting. We because I'm the one that works on the categories, and we had 103 different categories this time. Actually, we added a few more, so I think we ended up with 107 categories at the end, and we could have had a lot more, but we were trying to consolidate things because most people use a keyword search if they're looking for something really specific.
Mm-hmm.
And what was really interesting was I went in and monitored all the different categories during the fair because I thought, well, if we've got some with nothing in them, we'll delete those categories. We didn't have a single category that had nothing in it. And there was a really large amount of spread amongst the categories. Most categories, when I clicked on them to do the verification, had anywhere from 5 to 20 items in that category. So if you were looking for something specific, and I agree with you, Ed, I thought the quality was really good. I thought it was a diverse group of items with prices ranging from I even had a couple of things that were $25 because I wanted to be able to give the low end buyer a chance to get in, but then there were items that were thousands of dollars, and I had a similar experience to you guys. I had about a 20% pull through on it, but then since then I've now got a couple other sales that have come from working with those buyers after the fact. So, and the other thing that I agree with both of you on is the opportunity to make new contacts with these virtual fairs is really great because, when we're doing the in-person fairs, and nothing will ever replace the in-person fairs. First of all, we get to bring thousands of things instead of, 35. But and it's so nice to be able to see the people in person. But with these virtual fairs, we're able to reach people across the whole country, and even outside the country. I had a number of sales from Canada, and so we're reaching out to a much broader audience than we ever can at an individual live fair. And I think it gives us a chance to, which I've said this before, really get in and explain that interesting, unique item that you might not, as you're walking through a big fair, stop and take the time to really look at. And I'm always interested in the fact that I'll have something that I've had in stock for 3, 4, 5 years, and nobody's really looked at it much. But in these virtual fairs, when I get a chance to really open it up and talk about what it is and why it's significant, you get a lot of interest from buyers because they didn't take the time to really dig deep and look at the live fair.
Yep.
And I also think it's been a chance to bring a lot of booksellers into the ephemeral world, which is exciting because I think a lot of booksellers are finding that ephemera is really interesting and it dovetails really nicely with books. So we're excited about that crossover as well.
Well, we've always had a lot of ephemera, but it's always been as an adjunct to specific books, more or less. Not one-to-one correspondence, but ephemera that related to a topic that we had books on, primarily. So this has been kind of a shifting gears to pieces that stand alone, without a reference to some books. And so I think I'm still, feeling my way on what's good. Like you, I had things as low as $15, but they didn't sell. The things that sold were more expensive, which is fine with me. But it was, but it's been good. I bought a couple of things that I wouldn't have. Well, I bought one thing from someone who bought something from me. So, but I bought a couple of things that I would not have seen otherwise, and they turned out to be, even though I used different keyword searches to find them, they both turned out to be from Georgia, which was kind of interesting.
One last question before we let you go, Barbara. You talked about the guest speaker who had 18,000 rulers. Whew. Are you seeing a bleed over, a trend from a cross-pollination like you're seeing with books and ephemera and traditional ephemera in 3D objects? Or is the ruler thing just maybe a bit of an anomaly?
Well, first of all, most of her rulers are paper rulers.
Oh, okay.
And so, because a lot of people, when they were to advertise, would have a ruler that was calibrated at the bottom, but then it would have their ad above that for their products. And so that's kind of what got her going.
I see. I understand.
But the answer to your question is yes. And I think that we're seeing that in Valentines are a good example. And I think I showed you some around Valentine's Day where, the older Valentines were two-dimensional. They were, flat. But then when you got to probably the 1880s, 1890s, and then into the 20th century, the idea of having fold-out Valentines that were three-dimensional and would stand up became very popular. And so we're starting to see a lot more three-dimensional.
But often the common denominator is paper.
Yeah, the common denominator is paper. But just, as an example, and I've showed you some of these things before, this is a three-dimensional trade card, which it folds up flat, but then when you open it, it will stand alone and be displayed. And I like those things myself, so I have them on my shelf. But we definitely see a lot more three-dimensional stuff that's coming along, and part of that is attributed to just the creativity of the people. And I'll give you a good example. There used to be wonderful cut paper 3D stuff that was done in the 1800s. And then that kind of went away. Now with the advent of laser printers, the laser cutting, there's been kind of this resurgence in greeting cards that are three-dimensional because they are using the laser cutting to achieve those same looks that were done manually in the 1800s. And so the 3D part, I definitely think is here to stay, both from the old stuff and new stuff that's being generated.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Very enlightening.
I had a set of Kings of England cards from Terryton Cigarettes that included a little card that was 3D that folded out, kind of like the one you showed of St. Paul's Cathedral, that came with the cards, and it was tiny, just about like that, just folded out one time, so there was a little 3D picture of the cathedral, which is kind of
that's neat. Yeah,
and it was from the 30s. It was from the 30s.
Yeah, so 3D has always been fascinating to people and continues to be. One last plug I'd like to make, if I can, and that is Paper Mania is taking place in Hartford, Connecticut on August 28th, Saturday, and that's just in 2 weeks. And there's going to be a lot of dealers that will have a lot of ephemera, well, a ton of ephemera. It's one of the biggest paper shows in the country. I would suggest that they look up Paper Mania.
Paper Mania, okay.
Is it a live show?
They'll find the time and place at Paper Mania online.
Yeah.
Is it a live show?
It's a live show.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, in Hartford, Connecticut. So, hey, there's always paper to be found.
And to be bought and to be read.
Yeah.
There you go.
Always a pleasure, Barbara. I'm not sure when you and Alan have figured out you're coming back next, but it can't be too soon. What do you got in your mind? What do you think you're going to share with us next time? Any ideas?
Oh, I don't know. Usually Alan throws out a topic and I go searching through stuff and find stuff that matches it. So that's kind of...
Well, we're glad he found you.
Yeah. Well, good to see you guys. I'm glad you guys had a good fair, and we'll look forward to the next time that we all get together.
Carry on, soldier.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, Lee, up for our next segment, Richard Morey on the road, the Road Warrior. We're having a tough time keeping up with this guy.
I know.
But fortunately, he taped his segment for it. He's at yet another antique show up there in New England. We got to do a Where's Richard segment instead of a Richard is the Road Warrior, huh?
We should.
We could dress him up in a striped shirt.
That's right, just like Waldo.
With a little beanie on his head.
Yeah.
All right, everybody, here's Richard Morey with a pre-recorded message from the road. On the road with Richard. Go ahead, take it away.
Well, here we are, looking at the elusive Dr. Seuss puzzle. Yeah, I came back from Brimfield and proceeded to misplace it. I found it again, and so I wanted to tell you about it. We are looking at one of the rarest of the Seuss pieces. You can see this beautiful, beautiful puzzle here. These are done in the 1940s for a company, SO and you can see that this one has the original envelope, which is very, very hard to find. We have it on display, and this is one of the best Dr. Seuss pieces I have ever handled.
Well, that was worth the wait. We've been waiting for about a month now to see this Dr. Seuss puzzle.
He's had that cat in the hat, couldn't find it. He thought it was in his car. Maybe it was in the warehouse. He wasn't quite sure, but he was for sure going to find it, and he did.
I wonder if he sold it at that show. Maybe he'll report on that to us.
Yeah, maybe he won't be able to hold on to it that long.
Yeah, it's very neat, and the wonder is that it survived. Little hands playing with it, but maybe Mama kept it in the envelope and wouldn't allow it to be played with.
I know. I recently had a librarian call me. She said, "Could you come take a look at these books? I don't know if they're worth something or not." And I don't believe a young librarian should have a lesson in this, but I had to tell her it has any three combinations of tapes, tears, library stamps, pockets, torn pages, no dust jacket, torn dust jacket. Don't feel bad about putting it into the library sale $1 box.
Right. Yeah. Maybe even the 50-cent one.
Maybe even the 50-cent one.
Yeah.
All right, Lee. And now we're going to take it on to our next segment. We started talking about Uncle Remus last week, and it looks like it's turning into a segment. Where do you want to begin?
Well, we started this because I had an Uncle Remus composition book. And when we were talking about the first days of school, I had it. And so we went from there to talking about what we thought, what Joel Chandler Harris's, what he thought about in writing or in recording the Uncle Remus tales. And I think
what his motivation was.
His motivation, what we both felt was that he wanted to preserve these, and it was done out of affection for them. And I actually can give a little bit more background on this. Joel Chandler Harris was born in Eatonton, Georgia. He was the illegitimate son of a woman who was an Irish immigrant. His father, we don't know who his father was. He had red hair. He felt that he was ostracized in school, partly because of his mother's marital status and partly because of his red hair. He was widely read but was extremely shy and was something of a troublemaker in school. He said that his love of books came from, and this is really kind of, I don't know whether we would think it was the love of books came from his mother reading to him from the Vicar of Wakefield. I'm not sure we would find.
That wouldn't have been my choice.
Choice either. However, I had a book club member who recently had me order one of Mrs. Gaskell, Elizabeth Gaskell's books that the characters in The Vicar of Wakefield are reading because he loves that novel. So anyway, you never know. But when he was 14, he went to work for a man there in Eatonton, J.A. Turner, who published a newspaper called The Countryman. And he hired Harris as a printer's devil. Harris went on to learn the printing trade and wrote for the newspaper. He started in 1862. And I have a copy from 1862, about 6 months after he started working. He worked for him up until 1866, and eventually started writing short stories and poems and things like that were published in the newspaper. This is a really nice copy of it. It folds out to a 24 by 18 inch sheet. It's not a great deal of news, though this one did have a little article on how courageous the leaders of the Confederacy were to uphold slavery. Turner was very much a Southern loyalist. Harris's views were very different, but he did learn that trade there, and he wrote. And at its peak, The Countryman had a circulation of about 2,000, which was a lot in World War, in Civil War times. That was a lot, a large circulation. He went on to work for a number of newspapers, and really and truly, Harris was a journalist more than anything else. He worked for papers in Savannah and Macon and Forsyth, and then landed at.
We see that. Authors starting out as journalists.
Yes. And then was at the Atlanta Journal from, I think, about 1874 until 1900. He worked under Henry Grady for part of that time. Grady was editor. And of course, Grady's The New South was a supported equality for the freed slaves, education for them. And Harris's attitude was education for freed slaves and African American freedmen. But he still kept kind of a paternalistic attitude that whites were needed to take care of these folks. His background for the Uncle Remus stories came from working with Turner on Turnwall Plantation. He was much more comfortable in the slave quarters than he was in the plantation house, even though that's where he lived, partly because of his shyness and his feelings of inferiority because of his background and his red hair, which was very Irish, but was, I think, rather unusual. And children gave him a hard time about that. So he was more comfortable in the slave quarters, and a couple of the men in particular formed the basis for the Uncle Remus character. And after the first ones were published, starting in 1881, he would get information from all over people. Well, I have this story to share with you, or I have that story to share with you. And he continued writing the Uncle Remus stories. 3 were actually published after his death at the age of, he was 60 when he died. When he was at the in Atlanta, he bought a house that he had remodeled into this fancy Victorian structure called the Wren's Nest. It's now open to the public. I've been there. It's a lovely, lovely home. He married. He had a total of 9 children, 6 of whom survived infancy. He and his son, Justin, actually started a magazine called, I can't remember, the Uncle Remus Home something, that had a huge circulation. And his widow, Essie, continued publishing reprints after his death. Let's see if we'll show the one that has 2 book spines. Okay, this is from a series that was published starting in about 1908 called the Book Lovers Edition. And I'm not sure how many volumes it eventually had. We purchased about half a dozen or so from a friend. They belonged to his grandfather. And I have 2 left, these 2 left. One is a reprint of the first Uncle Remus, his songs and stories. And then the second is a reprint of a later one, Nights with Uncle Remus. And one, the original Uncle Remus, his songs and stories, was illustrated by two men, Frederick A. Church, not Frederick Church, who was the Hudson Valley artist, but an illustrator, and a man named Moser. And I tried to find out if he was an ancestor of Barry Moser, but I couldn't find any information to indicate that. But then A.B. Frost pretty much took over the illustrations. And I've got pictures of a couple of the illustrations. The first one, this is the Tar Baby one, and the Tar Baby one is, I think that's the church illustration. And then the next one, okay, no, this is the church one. The first one was an A.B. Frost illustration. This is the church one. And in the reprint of Nights with Uncle Remus, he has a long introduction thanking A.B. Frost that his work's popularity has been due as much to Frost as it has been to his writing. And I think that Mary Kay is going to do some research on the illustrations and talk to us about those in a few weeks.
Looking forward to hearing more about that.
Right. I do have one first edition of his. It is the Chronicles of Aunt Minerva Ann, and it's illustrated by Frost. Can you show us that one? And then we have I think I have an illustration from that too. Would be the very next one. But this is a first edition. And okay. And if you look at the illustration, it's become much more detailed than those original ones. Almost an engraving. Frost was colorblind, and there's some, indication that his colorblindness contributed to his use of gray tones and his mastery of gray tones, which is kind of interesting. Then we have, let's see, the story of Aaron. This is a Grosset and Dunlap reprint, and I have. And it's illustrated. This edition is illustrated by someone entirely different. Let me get the book. Oliver Herford, and I don't know anything about him, but we have an illustration from that book on a picture as well. There we go. There we go. It has almost an Oriental look to it. But that is a 1924 reprint. But he also, in working with Henry Grady, edited a memorial album about Grady, which we have a picture, and this is the first edition of that, and it's a book that that I've sold several copies of over the years. Henry Grady was an enormously popular figure, and so was Harris, and I'm not sure whether we talked about it last week, but when Lenox Square Shopping Mall opened in Atlanta in the 50s, at the far end of it where the movie theater was located were sculptures of the characters from Song of the South. Those have since been removed. But when I was young and we would come to Atlanta to shop from Birmingham, that was always something we wanted to see, was those characters, because Song of the South was a great favorite in my household. And like we said when we were talking before the show started, that reactions to Uncle Remus and to Harris's attitudes and things get mixed reviews. I think as a literary thing, they don't get a lot of credit. Some African American writers praise his saving these stories. People like James Weldon Johnson and Ralph Ellison and W.E.B. Du Bois. Others like Alice Walker and Toni Morrison didn't think much of him. And of course, they're a little more recent. And the main, one main reason was that the feeling was that as a white man, he should not have, taken these stories and presented them. Though, other
preserve them,
but yeah, that he preserved them when they would not have been preserved otherwise. Particularly post Civil War, when there were not probably that many African Americans who were literate and who could have preserved the stories if they had wanted to. And so, it's a controversial subject.
It's in the same category as Tom Sawyer.
Right. And actually,
American author who preserved the heritage and words of the people and the geography he was growing up in.
And actually, Twain was influenced by Harris's use of dialect, particularly in Huckleberry Finn. And Twain, when he was doing performances, would sometimes do some things from Joel Chandler Harris, and said that they were received with great enthusiasm. So times change, and but the stories are fun. The stories are fun to read, and my grandchildren still enjoy them, and my grandchildren are pretty much colorblind in many ways. So,
Lee, just a tangential question here a little bit. I wonder where, and I don't know if you would know, Disney stands on the subject nowadays. Are they continuing to re-release?
No.
Song
of the South has not been released in the United States, and still is not. It has. There have been releases in other countries, which, for all I know, are bootleg releases, but Disney has not released it in the United States.
Well, thank you, Lee. That was a great report and very informative. I'm looking forward to having Mary Kay Watson back soon to talk a little bit about the illustration side of the Uncle Remus tales.
I'm looking forward to that too.
All right, Lee, we're coming up on the end of the show, and that about almost wraps it up here for another week. Everybody, thank you for enjoying the Rare Book Cafe, the Book Lovers Rendezvous. Please send us your comments to rarebookcafe@gmail.com. Let us know what you're thinking. Coming up in future shows, next week's show, we're going to have Gigi Best will be back with us. She's going to talk about insights into searching your family's history. She has traced her history all the way back to Jamestown, Virginia, in 1619, and then even a portion of her family tree going back to Angola in Africa. Now, you may ask, what does this have to do with rare books? Well, let me tell you, as a bookseller, I rely very heavily on researching the genealogy. Often you have to confirm dates. Maybe you find a book plate with somebody's name. Maybe you find several signatures in the book and you're trying to figure out the provenance of the book, all of those things. I don't know about you, Lee, but I've got a subscription to Ancestry.com.
Well, and it's like the letters that I was helping research this weekend for a dealer that I sold them to. That was a source. Collections of the family letters of the University of Alabama was a source. To find out about the family gave you a kind of a background, even though the letters were from a governess in the family. She wrote so much about the family that was a starting place to try to find out more about that time and place.
Exactly. Well, we're going to hear more about that next week. All right, folks, that's all we've got time for.